This is the Popular Front podcast with me, Jake Hanrahan. We're focused on the niche details of modern warfare and underreported conflict all across the world. Popular Front is completely independent. Today we're speaking to journalist Ioan Grillo about the Mexican cartels that have moved into the district of Chiapas, a pretty historical place in Mexico, home to the EZLN, the Zapatistas, home to many indigenous groups, and now the cartels have moved in and have pretty much taken over without having much of a fight at all from anywhere. Ioan's been on the ground there many times. He's going to be telling us the reality of what's actually going on there. If you want more Popular Front, support us at patreon.com/popularfront. There's been some trouble in Chiapas, and I think that's one of these areas that everybody just kind of equates to, EZLN, it's a peaceful area, Zapatistas are there, but I know through your work, and actually good friend of mine, guy that works with us, Tiago Dizan, that there's a lot of other issues there. There's indigenous tribes, there's cartel trying to move in. There's been some recent violence there, right? Maybe you can just tell us what's been going on there.
Yeah. So Chiapas is a state in the south of Mexico. And like you say, a lot of people would know it from the Zapatistas, the uprising there in 94. Then a lot of Italians, Brits, French going over there to kind of be observers or supporting those communities. And as well as that, you have these kind of Mayan pyramids, Palenque. And so people saw that as being outside the cartel wars. And for a long time, it was outside the worst of the cartel wars, but cartels were there. There was, for example, Chapo Guzman, Chapo, was laundering money through there. And there was a guy in a big city there called San Cristobal, I discovered, who'd been basically a shoe shine guy and then suddenly had loads of money and bought a chain of hotels and gas stations. And basically everyone knew it was basically a front for El Chapo, laundering money down there, and moving cocaine through there. So you bring up the cocaine through Central America. It has a border with Guatemala, and it's a nice place to bring cocaine through. But for a long time, because the Sinaloa cartel had a monopoly there, then they didn't really have any problem, and violence was kept down. But that changed with this Jalisco New Generation cartel. I'm sure most of your listeners are probably aware of them. This kind of number 2 cartel in Mexico, and a very aggressive paramilitary model, and they basically started creating a base down there. Now, one of the funny things is that they actually came in from Guatemala. They started allying with Guatemalan drug traffickers, and it seems former Guatemalan special forces called the Caibiles, which are like, some people might be aware of them. Their motto is, if I retreat, kill me. They're like real hardcore kind of jungle training stuff. They did that anti-insurgency back in the 1980s against guerrilla groups there, and like cutting people's heads off in front of villages and stuff. So they kind of allied with them and started pushing in from the south and creating these areas. And they've got a front group there called El Maíz, which is like a front civilian group, as well as the Jalisco New Generation cartel, and started taking over towns. And so then you had this conflict between the Jalisco New Generation cartel areas and the Sinaloa cartel areas. Now, as well as trafficking drugs, they got into the big human smuggling business, which is, a lot of money in that, a lot of people coming through that area to go to the United States. But also they've gone beyond that. And I went to this particular town called Comalapa, where they've basically gone beyond that to start making everybody pay tax, like real more generalized shakedowns. So, if you start off with people who have market stalls, and these can just be somebody on the pavement with a market stall selling goods, and traditionally they've paid off some market leader, they take over that. They take over taxing bus drivers, all these different people. So it's quite a lot of money involved. And then it's just really kicked off with the conflict, really in a real big way, and these kind of blockades between the Sinaloa cartel territory and the Jalisco New Generation cartel territory.
Where are the other groups involved in all of this? Where is the Zapatistas? Where are the indigenous Autodefensas groups? Are they even on the radar here? Or they just been kind of stormed through?
Yeah, so first of all, what both of the groups have done, the Sinaloans and the Jaliscans, they've recruited kind of local people, local groups to be on their side. Now, I drove through this area and first through a town called Chamic, and then to Frontera con Malapa. And basically, you have to go through these different rival blockades. So we went through Chamic, and there's a bunch of people there, hanging around as you go into the town. Kids on motorbikes come look up, check who it is. We got blocked in by like an SUV there, and then they came out and checked us out. We had to move through that blockade. Then you go into the next town, into Frontera con Malapa, and they had a bunch of guys with machetes in the entrance to that town. Now, in the moment we were going through there, it was a fairly low-key, peaceful moment in terms of they weren't, immediately in kind of gunfights happening. But just before we came back, a week before, they'd been blockading the Sinaloa cartel because they kind of surround the Jalisco New Generation cartel territory, had completely blockaded it, said nobody's coming through, and blockaded all the goods from coming into that town. So nobody had any food in the supermarkets. Then they all kicked off again. Then the army went in there and they kind of calmed down a bit. And then a bit afterwards, there was a gunfight that happened, which lasted about 72 hours. Massive kind of gunfight going between these two towns. So you've got local groups there kind of recruited in. And then people in this town called Comalapa, they're pretty brutal in terms of the kind of regime they put there. You're kind of under occupation, and went to visit a pastor there for an evangelical church. And he was talking about, he said, we've been invaded. We're basically under occupation here. And he was terrified to speak out. And there was a local teacher there who, in a town, next town, who was sort of trying to speak out. And he started a march saying, and it wasn't a march saying we want the Jalisco New Generation cartel out. It was a march saying, let's have some peace, March for Peace. And they went to his house in the night, tied him up in front of his wife and kids, beat the crap out of him, and then killed him. And that was like an example. So in response to this, you do get some Autodefensas, self-defense forces, who are coming up and emerging, and we'll see how strong they become. I think Chiapas has the potential to be the next Michoacan. Michoacan was a state in the west of Mexico. It had a big Autodefensa self-defense force uprising back in 2014. That's when they filmed the documentary Cartel Land. And that was a crazy kind of uprising against the cartel by these armed groups. Chiapas has got the potential to be the next thing. Now, interesting what you say about the Zapatistas and the indigenous groups. So first on the Zapatistas, one thing I discovered, and I'm about to write another kind of essay about this, is that the Zapatistas are a lot weaker than they've been made out to be.
Yeah, I think that's... I thought that was quite clear as soon as it started happening.
Exactly. I mean, you can see, because otherwise, if supposedly they're defending people against extortion, against kind of predatory capitalists or whatever, then these people are really predatory capitalists. I mean, that's what cartels are. They're really aggressive organizations. And if you're not going to stand up and defend against this kind of thing, and basically their reaction has been, we're backing off. We're backing off further. We're kind of withdrawing further in. And I saw some of these Zapatista areas that I went to on this latest trip, and I've been covering this for going back for 20 years. Some of these Zapatista areas where you have the sign up saying you're in rebel territory, you're in Zapatista territory. Then I kind of ask people around that, so what's happening? They're like, no, we're not Zapatistas. They put the sign up, but it doesn't necessarily represent the whole community. It's like you can, in your street, put up, we're the Popular Front Army on this street, but then your neighbours might say, no, we're not. It's like, so the Zapatistas, I feel they're weaker and they're kind of backing off. Some of the indigenous people, though, it's a very interesting story. Nice story. I'm going to write on this group. There's an indigenous town called San Juan Chamula, and there's also a lot of people in the city of San Cristobal who they were basically people who migrated from the town of San Juan Chamula to the city. And they live in these big slums on the north side of the city, and they've basically become a powerful criminal force. The people are calling them the Cartel of San Juan Chamula, or the Cartel Chamula. I don't know how much that's a name being imposed on them by people kind of outside, but they are definitely a strong mafia now with strong power. And while I was there, they have various elements to them as a kind of mafia, like all these mafias, cartels do. They have one element which is more like a lot of young guys on motorbikes. And I mean, I saw some of these guys they're like driving around in these big squads of guys on motorbikes, like really intimidating. They'll like jack up cars, and then impose that they control these kind of market areas, shaking down the markets, control drug selling in the north of the city. Then while I was there, one of their guys got killed, one of their leaders got killed, and they're all storming outside the police station saying, "Give us the body," all of this kind of stuff. They become this kind of pretty powerful force there.
So, short of it is, the Zapatistas just don't have the gunpower, the men, the ability to fight the cartels, or is it that they have some kind of agreement with them, or what?
So yeah, the Zapatistas are quite hard to make sense of in a way when you really get into it. I mean, I've covered this for some time, and I've been to these Zapatista like areas. They call them Carteles, which are these kind of Zapatista encampments that most people go to when they visit the Zapatistas. And they got one in a place called La Garrucha. I went to in 2006, spent New Year's Eve there, covering when Marcos came out and went across Mexico in his thing called the Other Campaign. I covered Marcos when he went to Mexico City right back in 2001, just arrived in Mexico, and he came here in his first kind of big thing here. And I've been to some other communities like San Andres, a place called Avantique, Ocosingo. And it's quite hard. Like a lot of time, what we write about the Zapatistas, what you read about the Zapatistas, is quite. If you actually go back and look at a lot of the stuff about it, a lot of it's quite shallow. What's actually written about them, and it's kind of they're quite the group don't often give away much, and the people who are kind of let in to write a lot about them are often very very kind of sympathetic to Zapatistas, but not really asking kind of critical questions about it. So one of the things about the Zapatistas, which is kind of weird, is they had this uprising in '94. So in 94, they had a big bunch of people out with guns. Now, there's stories then that some of the guns were like simple guns made to look like AK-47s, but they were actually like simple kind of hunting rifles, and they kind of dressed them up. Some of them were supposedly even bits of wood like made to look like rifles. But they did have a genuine kind of uprising, and then they had this kind of 12 days of fighting with the army. And, you know, quite a lot of people got killed in those 12 days. But after only 12 days, they made these peace accords. So you see these kind of peace accords after 12 days, and they haven't really fought since then. So we haven't really seen any evidence in 30 years now of the Zapatistas having any kind of armed fighting capability. So people talk about, well, you have, there was an incident, a very sad incident in the late 90s when there was a bunch of indigenous people who were murdered by this kind of paramilitary people, anti-Zapatista paramilitary people. You know, even after that, there was not like a response from the Zapatistas to that, like a militarized response. So you've got to kind of wonder really what kind of forces do they have at all? I mean, they obviously have some people. Now, back in 2006, when I was covering the stuff then, and you saw them come out, they would bring out quite a lot of people suddenly to these these demonstrations and stuff, and you see quite a few thousand people, but no real kind of armed presence, and that kind of now when we talk about the Zapatista communities, people often talk about the Zapatistas are governing, all this kind of having this revolution on the ground and having all this stuff. But then we actually kind of drill down into it. Often it says it's not really the whole towns they're controlling. They have certain affiliates in these towns, but not the entire town. So they're not really governing in that kind of real sense these territories. And I think there's a little bit of mythology that's come out about the Zapatistas that's kind of out there and hasn't really been kind of questioned that heavily about really what they are. So you see a bit of a paper tiger when you actually see like a real force come against them. Like, where are they to defend? Now, have they got? Now, you can say on the other side, if they were to come out and say, we're going to fight the cartels, we're going to fight the Sinaloa cartel, the Jalisco Generation cartel, then, these are very, very violent people. And a lot of people be killed. So you can see, okay, for fair enough, you don't want to engage in conflict with these groups. But I think if you're kind of serious about analysing this stuff, you have to look about really what presence they have.
I'm glad you said it, because that was, whilst I was looking into it and speaking to various people I know who've been there, and that's what I came to realise. There was a point last year where I was looking to maybe do a doc on, this situation's been ongoing for a while, and I was thinking, that would be really interesting. Like, Zapatistas are going to end up in combat potentially with like Cartel. And the more I looked into it, I was like, okay, they're not going to. Some of the areas have already been taken like without any violence. And I think whilst I've read quite a bit on the EZLN, very fascinating, very interesting ideology that works for them in their enclave. But if you can't protect yourself from, like you said, the main thing they're meant to be against, then it's essentially useless. And from what I've understood is I think a lot of people that are sympathetic to them project what they're doing onto them as opposed to what's actually going on, and then they project that out into the world. Then it's just not real life, you know what I mean? It's unfortunate, but it seems to be what's happening.
I think that's nail on the head, actually. What you're saying is that, like, I mean, there's a lot about, I mean, first there's a lot about the indigenous communities in Mexico, which I do like and respect. And I do think there is something there about, when you go and you visit and talk to indigenous people in Mexico, and indigenous people being these, it can be Tzotzil speakers, these kind of communities that have been there for thousands of years before the Spanish conquest, and they got different traditions in different ways and stuff. And it is fascinating to talk to a lot of these people. And I've got a lot of respect for a lot of those people in those communities. And I do have a lot of respect for a lot of the way those communities have kind of been quite suspicious since the Spanish conquest about basically the kind of globalization, about a lot of these things, and kind of like to try and live in their traditions and not, keep a bit, push outsiders, keep outsiders away a bit. And I quite respect that. And I think there's an element of that you see when you go to some of these communities and meet some of these people. But I think, like the idea that, when people go there, so you kind of start projecting this idea of a peaceful revolution happening. And I think some of this, Subcomandante Marcos, who's not an indigenous guy himself, he's a kind of educated guy who was a university lecturer before he kind of got into the jungle and started becoming a revolutionary. And you can see a bit of this kind of theatre around him. I mean, the fact that he still gives interviews wearing a balaclava, but he's obviously not really kind of wanted in that same sense. So he's kind of a bit of a pretend guerrilla, a pretend revolutionary. So I think the way that people could support the Zapatistas, like you can be into this kind of revolutionary idea. I'm part of a revolution. But rather than supporting a real revolutionary group like, I don't know, the Shining Path in Peru, who are kind of brutal, or the
absolute nutters.
Or the FARC in Colombia, or I don't know, the Islamic State or whatever, like a real revolutionary violent group. You can kind of have the flavour of that without kind of supporting a real revolution. On the flip side, I will say that probably if there had been a real revolutionary group there, like really carried on a sustained guerrilla warfare against the government for the last 30 years, it might have been a lot worse. You've had a lot of people killed, and where does that really go anyway? So, I mean, people can kind of go and see that and then kind of bring out their own discourse, and it's anti-capitalism, it's anti-globalization, but then you really get into like, what are they really kind of saying? A lot of it sounds good, and it's stuff that kind of sounds good and we can agree with, but what are they really, really representing? And then a lot of people, I think, going there, not really even getting into the countryside. I mean, it was very interesting. In 2006, when I was there at this, I spent the New Year's Eve at this community there, and I spent a lot of time talking to a young Zapatista from, pro-Zapatista from a little village. And he was proper, grew up in the jungle, real limited frames of reference. The only film he'd seen in his whole life was Bruce Lee, Enter the Dragon. And that was because the Zapatistas got into, some of the real grassroots Zapatistas got into that film, like Enter the Dragon. He had I was talking to him then, he had no reference of, who the president of the United States was, who, like, any of these kind of things. His heroes were Bruce Lee, Che Guevara, and Pope John Paul II. So then that's the proper kind of grassroots. It's quite hard to get in. Actually, I spent a lot. It was New Year's Eve. There's no alcohol. They banned alcohol in the community. They had this kind of like this. They had this like national anthem playing and different people. So I just kind of spent time and sort of talking, and he was an interesting guy. But that's not really the Zapatista kind of thing you hear. You hear Marcus's messages kind of put out, and then people interpreting and throwing those off, and kind of throwing this big kind of using the rhetoric of a lot of the kind of anti-globalization, anti-capitalist kind of movement. But it's not really the way a lot of, the actual reality on the ground of how a lot of people are living down there.
Yeah, I think the problem is, even though you've just said that, you've been there and I've heard similar things from other people that would be there. There is always someone, usually in America, on the internet that will say, "No, you're wrong." They haven't been there, but they will decide that you're wrong. But I think the reality is, and I think the Zapatista, like a lot of what they do, I'm not like against them. I don't think they're terrible or anything. I think it's very fascinating, super interesting ideology. It's kind of like modern jungle libertarianism. It's pretty cool. But the reality is very different to what they want it to be. And I think in a situation like this, where Chiapas is like literally under attack from cartels, it becomes very apparent, right? It's just, yeah, okay, not much. They're not doing anything to have to drive them away. Okay, maybe they can't do anything, but then it's like, then what does it actually represent then? They can't, if you can't hold the land that you're trying to have the utopia in or the community in, then that's the very first hurdle, or you've already fallen at it, right? Like, you have to be able to protect your gates if you want to have what you have inside there.
Yeah, well, also, I mean, you mentioned that there's definitely a lot of Americans, a lot of Italian. I mean, there's a big support from Italy, and there was this kind of Italian supporters who bought a bunch of coffee from the communities and really created over a long time this support. And when the Italians came over, there was a big contingent of Italians that came over in 2001 to march the capital. They called them the White Monkeys. funny enough. But yeah, and they'd be like, yeah, and again, they're kind of putting, they're putting it in line with this kind of Italian tradition of Italian anarchism, Italian kind of socialism, whatever. And again, these are nice people individually, but they're, say, projecting a slightly kind of thing on it when you actually talk to the people on the ground. But as well as that, there's also within Mexico. I live here in Mexico City, and in Mexico City, there's a lot of Mexican intellectuals who also projected something on the Zapatistas. So it comes through that as well. So you got when the Zapatista uprising happened in '94, and then at the big public university in Mexico City, the UNAM. In the UNAM, you had loads of people pro Zapatistas, and again, for them, it was this idea of revolution, this idea of Zapata, being the hero of the Mexican Revolution. But they also projected this kind of fantasy about what it was, and in Mexican culture, you get this kind of guilt as well, a kind of weird mixture of guilt and pride and connection to the kind of indigenous community in Mexico. Like, this was the kind of heart of the people going back before the Spanish conquest. Now they're like second-class citizens, but we kind of feel this this kind of thing with them. So that was a way of allaying that. But then you see as well that a lot of that, and then anyone who criticizes this idea, so it becomes a bit of a sacred thing, the Zapatistas. And if you say what I'm saying now, this can be taken as offensive. It's a bit like another big symbol in Mexico is the Virgin of Guadalupe. It's like a real big symbol of kind of Mexicanness, and it's a bit like you're offending our national symbol. It's like a Virgin of Guadalupe kind of symbol. You're offending this. Why are you doing this? And so kind of lashes out. Well, what are you, CIA or something? You're kind of. So there was a guy. There was a Mexican academic who actually went in the late 2000s and did some proper investigations in the Zapatista communities. Actually went down there properly to not just these caracoles, which are the kind of the public face, but properly into the jungle, properly into the highlands, really getting down there with how people are living on the ground, and said it's not like what the mythology says here. They're not really having a government in these areas. They're actually very top-down and authoritarian in their message, like messaging. It's not like, it's all this kind of wonderful democracy stuff. And then everyone really attacked him, said he's like a CIA agent, all this kind of stuff, or he's like, people, often don't want to have a particularly critical conversation about this. Or other people. There was another guy. I mean, some of the people who are proper revolutionaries, and I talked to one in this latest trip who'd been there in '94, and also been in America, in El Salvador back then as a student. He volunteered and fought with the guerrilla in El Salvador. And he was like, no, it's a farce. It's not a real revolution that's happening right there. So it's interesting. But now with the cartel stuff and with the Jalisco New Generation cartel, with the cartels in Mexico, in some ways, this is a genuine, insane revolution that I've been here covering for 20 years with the cartels. I mean, this is transforming Mexico on the ground. This is
crime revolution, right?
yeah, a crime. I mean, a revolution that crazy things are happening. That you suddenly see. I mean, not a revolution in any kind of good way, But like in terms of how they can really challenge the government, I mean, you saw things like Culiacan 2019 when they put 800 gunmen against 350 soldiers, and then took over the city. Or right, I mean, obviously when you see Ecuador right now as well, there's like another crazy kind of gangster uprising happening. But these are like mad groups in terms of people at arms, in terms of level of support that they have these days. But also they impose basically a lot of pretty brutal stuff among the people they govern.
Popular Front is entirely grassroots and independent. Subscribe to our Patreon for hundreds of exclusive bonus episodes, extra video content, access to the Popular Front network, and more. Keeps us moving forward, keeps us independent. Patreon.com/popularfront. If you like Popular Front, you probably don't like surveillance and internet censorship, so we've teamed up with Proton VPN, who are sponsoring this episode. They're offering our listeners a deal on their services that will help you swerve the internet gatekeepers and various firewalls. Go to protonvpn.com/popularfront to save money on internet privacy services with Proton VPN. Yeah, well, this is the thing. I mean, I'm sure people get very annoyed at us for this, but we deal in Popular Front. I would say to people, like, we deal in real life. Like, if you're upset because, oh, well, I read this, all right, well, fine, it's irrelevant to me. The real life will always trump whatever. Saying that though, so what's the actual benefits for the cartels in Chiapas? Like, why do they want that area? Why are they moving in there? Why is this so, like you said, it might become like the next big war zone essentially? Why? What is so special about this area?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, the cartels now see basically all of Mexico as being potential real estate. So it's kind of, I mean, even you look around Mexico these days and places, there's a state called Guanajuato, right, which was a few years ago really peaceful. You thought, there'd be cartels there. Became one of the most insane wars in the whole country. Zacatecas, but basically anywhere they can think of. So in some ways, it's which states, there's only a small number of states have kind of avoided the worst of the violence, but basically anywhere they see as kind of fair game. So you have, for a long time been moving cocaine through there, continue to move cocaine through there. So like if you're moving cocaine over land, so you can bring cocaine from Colombia, you can, bounce it into Central America, move it over land, then you go through Guatemala and you go right into Chiapas is one of the key routes. So you kind of bring it up through there. So that's one big thing. Second thing, you have, I mean, right now, this enormous amount of money from human smuggling. And when I mean say human smuggling, I mean undocumented migrants paying money to people to take them through. Now you've got record numbers of people arriving at the US border. Over 2 million now a year being found, and a lot more not being caught. And a lot of those people will pay what they call a pollero, a human smuggler, pollero or coyote, which is a human smuggler to take them through. That amount of money now is really inflated. The amount of money you're paying to a human smuggler. It used to be, it's a few years ago, it was a couple of $1,000. Now it's like things like $10,000, $15,000 from Central America or even from places in Mexico to go up. You pay that money, and they'll deliver you from where you start in Chiapas or in Honduras or in El Salvador, and take you to Chicago, New York, or whatever it is, North Carolina, wherever the job is, wherever the family is in the United States. And the cartels basically running that business and taking a big chunk of that business. But as well as that, they're just seeing this as well, kind of where you get the worst type. I mean, the way organized crime operates in Mexico varies from state to state and town to town, but they're becoming really predatory, like really predatory in terms of, okay, you're selling chickens, we're going to take a 10% cut on that. You're selling tortillas, we're going to take a 10% cut on that. You're farming, and you're farming cows, we're going to charge you for every cow you sell. So all they become very predatory, and it becomes a big amount of money that they can draw from.
Right. So how far are they? Have they like basically they've moved into Chiapas, or they hold it? It's theirs now, or it's ongoing. What's the situation like on the ground?
Yeah, so now like when you talk about cartel control, there's different levels in different places. Like some places where the cartels are there, but they're not as open. So and this goes across Mexico. So you can go into a town, and the cartels will be operating there. They'll be selling drugs there. Be having people around there, but you still walk around and you won't see them. It's not like really open. And other towns where they're basically like controlling. So this idea of you go in there, they got a barricade. As soon as you go in there, you've got to deal with them. They're overseeing and occupying the town very openly. So basically, the entire state they're there. I mean, they're basically every municipality in Chiapas. They've got presence there, but they've got more direct, kind of brutal control in maybe a third of the state. And this is the two different cartels working with local affiliates, and including the Chamula cartel of indigenous people, which is kind of more affiliated to Sinaloa cartel. And that's where it's kind of really brutal. And there's certain front lines where the worst of the violence happen is the kind of front lines, particularly near the Guatemalan border, which are the front lines between these two cartels.
Right. So there's not. Is it right to say then that any like violence that's going on, it's basically cartels leaning on normal people or just killing them because they've even dared to speak out in any way, or cartel on cartel violence? It's not like auto defense groups fighting them to keep them out or anything like that's just not happening. Is that right?
Well, so in terms of you've got definitely a lot of the violence against regular people or against violence. I mean, cartels always have violence against people who, they might give somebody some drugs to sell and they come up short on their payments and they kill them for that reason, whatever. But then there's a big front of cartel versus cartel. And there's some big gunfights happening there. Now, I know, this is your podcast focuses particularly on kind of irregular warfare and stuff. So, I'm sure people will be familiar with some of the irregular warfare in, say, Michoacan, Jalisco border or Zacatecas. And that's where you get kind of more of the kind of makeshift armored vehicles and drones and that kind of thing. So we haven't seen so much of that, but we've got close to that happening. I mean, like big armed groups, guys in, military gear having full-on fights, big shootouts. So there was a shootout earlier, just a week or so ago, it lasted 72 hours in this area. So on that front line, they're in big cartel on cartel fights. Now, as far as the Autodefensas groups go, you've had a lot of these groups starting to kind of claim that they're rising up. And this is in some quite remote areas. So you have them where they'll make a video and they'll be there like, or a photo, and there'll be a bunch of guys saying, we're defending this area. And you've started to see some conflict between them and the cartels. And there's various group, one called like Machete, or the kind of different groups that start appearing in different parts of the state. The problem is, like in a lot of Mexico, with these self-defense groups, with these autodefensas, you don't know a lot of the time, are they really a genuine self-defense group of kind of honest people trying to defend themselves against the cartel, or are they simply a front for one of the cartels? So you get, yeah. Well, yeah, and you get a mix. I would say, I mean, you talk about, maybe I would say overall in Mexico, maybe 70% of the latter, and maybe there's like 30% left, the kind of 30% left, which is still, broadly honest. Sometimes, based out of community assemblies, based out of these old indigenous communities, and like we've got our own kind of voluntary police who will try and defend ourselves against the cartel from like illegal logging or whatever. And this again comes back to, I mean, it would be a big opportunity here for the Zapatistas if they were to say we're going to defend these people, we're going to help arm them, we're going to defend and support these groups who are trying to stand up to these cartels.
Yeah, my friend Tiago, he actually spent like quite a bit of time with a proper like indigenous Autodefensa group, and I mean, he was under no illusions. But he said like, yeah, they're like these guys are really genuine. They're not they're not joining cartels, and he said even the cartels sometimes approach them in a non almost in a businessman kind of way, but they're very specific. It's kind of like one small farm I think they have where they're like, look, just stay the fuck away from this farm and we're good. But they're all armed, but it's not like they're taking it to the cartel, and they're just doing what they can to kind of keep their business independent, I guess. And I think that's more, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, this is your beat, but that sounds to me like more likely where these people would be, staying honest, just to keep a little bit of their own land as opposed to like trying to drive the cartel out or anything.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But this can easily change. So if you see what happened in like Michoacan and Guerrero back in 2014, 13, 14, then you started off with this kind of same thing, kind of scattered groups saying we're going to just defend our little community and you don't come in here. But then what happened was, you started getting, these cartels are a hungry monster that's never full and always wants to expand and get more territory. So you suddenly get elements of the cartel want to shake people down, want to kidnap people. So you got this town in Guerrero where these people were getting, were shaking people down, and then somebody was killed, and suddenly the town rose up and were like, okay, fuck you. And they rose up and kind of chased them out. And then the cartel was like, we're going to have to hit them for chasing our guys out. So they had to get armed. They went to other towns and started recruiting. And I remember going to this one town, and it was a crazy scene that seemed like something out of a movie. It reminded me a bit of the scene of the film Patriot, the American film. You've seen that with Mel Gibson. Uh, yeah, where they're like getting people, recruiting Americans to fight the Brits, but where he goes into this kind of town and who will fight with me, and then people start coming forward. It was a bit like that. It was like they come to this town, they said, who's going to stand up and fight the cartel, and then like the taxi driver with a beer belly steps forward, and then like a young teenager who's quite kind of game steps forward, and then before you know it, they got a little militia, and then they create the little militia, and then it became like that. From like that, they started becoming like an army. And then, when it spilled over into Michoacan, by the end they had 10,000, 20,000 people, be able to confront the cartel. So this thing could easily explode. And what's kind of amazing to see in Mexico is really how the government allows these towns to fall. I mean, like, so this town of Comalapa, so it's a small town, and suddenly that town is really under cartel occupation. And so everyone's living there being really brutalized. And the government has let this happen. Hasn't, give basic defense of people. So will that town suddenly erupt in the future? We'll see. I don't know if you remember a video that went viral. And the video supposedly showed the Sinaloa cartel rolling into a town and everyone cheering because they were liberating them from the New Generation cartel. Did you see that one?
Yeah, but from what I understand, it was bullshit, right?
Yeah. So basically, it was kind of staged. This is right around this area. So basically, that was just around the town of Chimix. The Sinaloa cartel had that territory. So this video for people can find it online. This kind of video went viral because it had this convoy of cartel guys, going along in these pickup trucks, all with masks on and AK-47s and and people on the road cheering, and it was put out as being the Sinaloa cartel is liberating the territory from the extortionists of the Jalisco New Generation cartel. But I went to the place where that video was filmed, and basically the Sinaloa cartel had already controlled that territory. So basically it was like, I mean, it's kind of funny, but they arranged these videos a bit like, ISIS do or whatever, when they kind of set up propaganda videos. They're like, we're going to set the video up here. And they set it up with them coming through, and the people who were cheering were either part of their civilian group already, or they were basically pushed into doing it, saying you have to go out and cheer, or we're going to fine you, give you a fine for not going out to cheer the cartel. So it went out, and a lot of the media kind of reposted it Everyone's cheering this in a lower cartel, but that was what that was the message the cartel wanted. So they got the media to promote their message. So yeah, it was pretty funny, and it's funny. Like a lot of the cartels have like in the Jalisco New Generation cartel. A lot of people might have seen the kind of there's a big famous video from a couple of years ago where it's got all of these guys in military gear saying "Arriba el Mencho, arriba el Mencho." It's kind of a real famous video. This huge force, and there's a guy who's behind a lot of those videos. He's like the propaganda genius of the Jalisco New Generation cartel called Doble R, who's now like a big player, even looking at the leadership there.
So it's at a stage now where the government has zero control. Is that right? Like there's just no way. They're not even trying. In Chiapas, I mean.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's even a bit more complicated than that. So, you know, you get the in Mexico now. You've got a very big military, expanded in size, military and National Guard. So the National Guard began as like supposedly like a kind of militarized police force, but they basically have been taken into the army. So the army kind of almost doubled its size. Now, still in terms of, the problem with this, even if they were honest, the problem with the military confronting cartels is that it's a bit like if you're dealing with insurgent forces. So when you're dealing with insurgent forces, like the military can suddenly go into a town and you can go in there with 1,000 troops and a bunch of big vehicles, and the cartel forces can all just disappear. They're all like gone. Oh, suddenly they're not there anymore. They go into safe houses, or they go into the mountains, or they just disappear. So the military have regained control, supposedly. But then the military go again, and the cartel's back. So it's not like you're kind of reconquering, when you kind of get rid of the Islamic State from a bit of territory, and you get them out, and then you've retaken the territory. It's like they're there the whole time. You'd have to, so they say this in like this kind of anti-insurgency doctrine, you have to control every inch of ground all the time. Now, what happens practically is, so like you'll get like a big bit of violence happening, and there'll be an outcry, and it'll be kind of on, in the national media. So the government says, "Oh, send in the military." So they send in the military, and things calm down for a bit. And you'll have like the soldiers standing there, but then it kind of goes away from the headlines and starts to creep back in. So you get a weird situation where you'll get like a military checkpoint, and then you go down the road, and then you've got the cartels there having their own checkpoint. And then on the ground, then what happens is, deals are made between the cartel and elements of the military. Now, often, this issue, obviously, and it's not news to anybody that Mexico's massively corrupt, and high-ranking generals or defense ministers or presidents themselves have been accused of working with cartels. But like how it actually happens on the ground is like, so it can be, that a deal is made with a general or a colonel who's overseeing a certain area. So he makes a deal with the cartel there. And it seems, according to some people I spoke to, it's hard obviously to know exactly, but there's a lot of deals being made in Chiapas between the Jalisco New Generation cartel and the military on a local level. Now, other places, the Jalisco New Generation cartel are fighting the military. In Jalisco, there's guys, who have kidnapped and murdered colonels and generals and shot down military helicopters and all kinds of stuff.
Right, so they're less likely to kind of have the tactic of like, let's just blend in for a bit.
Yeah. Or just so a deal is made. I mean, they say there's a saying in Mexico like no general can resist a cannonball of $1 million pesos. Right. So it's a saying that goes back to the revolution. I think it was the amount was less then, but basically, like these, like if you're a general and you kind of, you start to know. I mean, you look at it cynically. There's this violence that's going to happen, and you're like, okay, I might as well make some cash and set myself up for life with this. I've got a good posting here. Somebody comes with a suitcase of whatever it is, $500,000, $1 million, name it. It can be a lot more sometimes. Then you can start working with them. Then a lot of violence then happens because then, the cartel will give some general a bunch of money, and then they'll arrest one of their guys anyway. And they're like, we paid you and you betrayed us, so we're going to kill you, or we're going to kill your guys. Or so you get a lot of the kind of violence happening that way.
So they, I mean, what's the? I mean, I know about all this in terms of the government's kind of lack response from Mexican friends I have, but when I'm like, well, there's really like no plan. It seems to be like, no, there's just never a plan to like, this is it now, this is it. Like the cartels, that's it. They run the place basically. I mean, what can even be done?
Yeah. So you look at this development in Mexico, and we see the last three presidents have all failed on the issue of cartels, and they've had slightly different policies. So you have Felipe Calderon, who had overtly this idea of we're going to fight the cartels, we're going to bring them down. Now, actually, he had a lot of his, he had his own, security minister working with the cartels. So you had, insane stuff happening there. Like, and I covered this at the time, and it was kind of heartbreaking in some ways. It was kind of like, jogged my reality. Like, I went to see some of his trial in New York for this guy, Henry Garcia Luna. And they had things there where they made the biggest, at the time, it was the biggest cocaine seizure in world history. 23 tons of cocaine seized off a boat off Manzanillo. So they had that, burned it on a bonfire, 23 tons of cocaine. And then in the trial, I covered it at the time. And then in the trial, this gangster said, no, we got the cocaine back. They seized it, but then we made some fake cocaine with flour and sugar and just like made it into these fake bricks and then changed that for the real cocaine. So the stuff you saw being burned was fake. And so I say, oh, you're naive, you should have known that. But it's when you're actually covering this and it's like, fuck, you think, they're really that far that they actually got the whole 23 tons of cocaine back. And a lot of what you covered was just like fake. And it kind of like pulls the rug a bit from your kind of, from reality. So, but anyway, so you had the kind of, it was kind of meant to be a war on cartels under Felipe Calderon. And then under the next president, who was Enrique Peña Nieto, they had this policy of let's not talk about it. Don't talk about cartels. They called it, among the official circles, changing the narrative. And it was like, you change the narrative and there won't be like, you will talk about other stuff and everyone will be positive, but you can't, like you were saying, you can't change the reality on the ground. You can, wherever you talk about, there's a, reality bites. There's a real, you get mugged by reality. The cartels are really there. So like then you had this kind of kidnapping and murder of 43 students or student teachers, all of this kind of stuff. And then, he ended up very badly. And then you had this current president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, and he had two kind of big ideas. One was this idea, which everyone makes fun of him about now, which is hugs, not bullets, abrazos, not balazos. Now, I do agree that you do need a big prevention program. I mean, you do need to say, like, how can you stop the young 12-year-old kids being recruited into the cartels? Because right now, I mean, right across Mexico, as we speak right now, as we're talking here now, there's kids who are 12 years old who are being recruited, who are ending up on the street, starting off with a radio, reporting as a call of halcon, like a lookout. Before they know it, you get people who become like hitmen at like 15, 16, and then they're dead by 17 or whatever. It was a guy called. So you need prevention, but he had this, didn't really have much of a concrete policy. Just said hugs, not bullets. And everyone makes fun of him. His other idea was this idea of kind of like the state, kind of regain the state, and that he put a lot into the army. So the army has become a more powerful player in Mexico. It's got the National Guard now, it's basically doubled in size of numbers. It's got like also starting to run businesses, like run airports, run companies. So it's becoming a bit of a military industrial complex. Now the worry is that I've covered Venezuela, and Venezuela you had the kind of worst of both worlds, where you had a really powerful military industrial complex. At the same time, you had rampant crime on the ground. And they just take out political enemies, who point them out, take them out, but there's still insane criminality happening on the ground. We're going to probably get Mexico's first female president this year in the election in June, Claudia Sheinbaum, and we'll see if she had any ideas for dealing with this. But I would say long term, I mean, there's a trend. I don't like this, but it's kind of a reality. And I do kind of face up to reality. There's a trend in Latin America now of hard authoritarian approaches. So you see Bukele in El Salvador, which is mass incarceration, but it's been effective at taking out gangs. And you see in Ecuador right now, the president declaring an internal armed conflict, which is very interesting because in Mexico and most countries, they don't like talking about armed conflict. They say it's a crime problem because armed conflict is like bad for them. So we'll probably might see a more authoritarian approach at some point. But there's other deeper things I think that can be done, but they're hard and long term, like trying to reduce the drug market, trying to have real prevention, trying to have real police forces.
So basically, no is the answer. Like, it doesn't sound like anything's gonna get like better in any way. I guess it's. I mean, how do you even? In terms of like the people of Chiapas, like how affected are they by this now? Like your everyday people, that are just living there. How different has their lives changed, if at all, from now that the cartels have moved in?
Yeah. Let me just answer first your point you made about no. I think one thing, and it's interesting that this was said by the guy who used to run Mexico's intelligence agency. But this going back about 15 years, he said this will probably last about 30 years, this conflict in Mexico. So kind of like a 30-year war. Now, I don't know if there's a science behind that, but maybe this cartel war in Mexico, yeah, like you could believe that generation and a half, it's a 30-year war, and then for some change, things might get better. But about how people, so it varies a bit, but people now have been, everyone's been affected by it in a basic way, in that like now everyone's been, seeing the stuff in TV of some of these big incidents, big shootouts, big stuff happening, big kidnappings. So everyone's become now aware of it. Certain areas now and certain roads, people are like, don't go down that place, don't go to that place, which then affects tourism, affects business. So business being quiet. I mean, some of these areas, there was a massive market on this one border town called Cuauhtemoc. Massive market there, completely dead because no one's going there anymore because everyone's too scared to go to that area. So you get kind of certain areas picked up with the economy. Then you've had areas sustained shootouts, which have then also caused, and this happens across Mexico, but you've got it in Chiapas, is people then shut down schools for the day. So this is what a lot of people on the ground, they're thinking about, kids going to school, that basic stuff. And then like a big shootout happens. Suddenly words out there's a shootout happening on these streets, and everyone like runs to the kids' schools to try and get them out. People sheltering in place, and that kind of thing happens. And then you've also got people who are then having to pay extortion money, having to pay up some kind of, some kind of money to the cartel. So you've got a lot of people affected, quite a lot. Now you can still go there to certain places. You can still go there to San Cristobal, the city, go to the center, and it still looks fairly normal. Still walk around there, and it's like, okay, it's all kind of normal. Still go to the pyramids, looks fairly normal. But then you soon sort of get out of it, or sort of get under the surface, and you find it's not not very normal at all.
Yeah, it's a real shame. I understand it's like a really beautiful area, right?
Absolutely stunning. Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful nature, beautiful in terms of the history, and yeah, it's still a fascinating place, and it's tough. Like with a lot of these things about a lot of people come to me to ask about travel advice within Mexico and stuff, and you get some ideas. And I try to avoid being part of this, but sometimes it's hard to be to give the kind of balanced thing in the media when you cover real hardcore violence. Some people like saying like don't go to Mexico at all; the entire country's off limits, and that's not true. There's still places in Mexico you can go to, and still places in some of these states you can go to. But it is sometimes this kind of risk aversion, risk analysis. So you can still go to like Cancun, for example. You go on a resort there, you're fine. Tulum, where a lot of the raves were happening, south of Cancun, there's been a lot of violence happening there recently, connected to selling drugs for the raves there. So that's been a big thing. Mexico City is fairly low murder rate, and this is a kind of funny thing that surprises some people. But the actual murder rate in Mexico City now is lower per 100,000 than many US cities. And people check out the numbers if they don't believe this, but lower than Houston. It was even lower than Portland, Oregon. And Portland, Oregon saw a big uptick in murders. So Mexico City is fairly okay, but there's still some weird things happen. But then there's some other places which are like insane murder levels and crazy stuff happening.
That is interesting. It's a real shame at the same time, but I don't think it's that surprising, unfortunately. Just the more I read about it, the more it's like, yeah, of course this is going to happen. It's like dominoes. You live there. You've been reporting there a long time. You know all about the cartels. You're in and out of these areas. You're actually on the ground. How come you haven't been killed? Like, I'm not being like a dick. Like that's a real threat, right?
So look, it's challenging covering all of this stuff. Like anything, like being a fireman, being a miner. I mean, you can see there's a lot of deaths in mines, a lot of death among firemen. Doesn't mean everyone's being killed all the time. I've been in Mexico for 23 years. In the time I've been here, there's been more than 150 journalists who've been murdered. Now, one thing about it, and some of these have been good friends of mine, but one thing about it is generally the journalists who have been murdered have been living in the towns and cities where the cartels are strongest. So for both journalists who are like living in Mexico City, or kind of flying in and out, it's not as bad. If you're living in these small towns, they know exactly who you are, they know where you live, and you're really, really under pressure from them. Now, I don't want to, say there's any immunity, because journalists have also been killed in just covering gunfights, covering these things, and obviously bullets don't recognise, your passport or where you live or anything. So there's obviously the danger there. I've had, a lot of incidents over the years. I continue to have them. There's times I've been accused of being a DEA agent. People threatening, saying if they see me again, they'll shoot me in the head. Had people follow me and box me in and had to, call for help. And had people phone my hotel and, call me by name and all this kind of stuff. So I've had plenty of things over the years. But there's still, various journalists here who, like some of the other colleagues here, people like Luis Chaparro, guy I do a lot of work with, who does loads of great stuff. Oscar Balderas, people who are really getting in the thick of it and doing a lot of stuff and still carrying on to write another day.
Yeah, it's really, when I read about it, I just think, I think I've always wanted to do some work there, but I read about it and I think I'll skip that one. Honestly, I'm scared of the place. It sounds like, okay, yeah, you might be fine, but you really might not be at any moment. Do you know what I mean? If you're covering cartel stuff, it just spooks me out.
Yeah, I mean, you've covered Ukraine and all of these crazy places. So it's definitely no worse than that. I mean,
well, I have the thing though, like where, like, okay, yeah, I might get hit with a shell or like you might get shot. But when you're done, you're away and you're pretty safe. You know what I mean? The fear I have is like someone coming into your hotel and being like, come with us. Like, it's time to lose your fucking head. Like, that's what really scares me, that kind of stuff.
I mean, definitely there's a weird thing. And this could, again, get into this kind of weird type of conflict that Mexico is. And how, if you compare this to the civil wars in El Salvador, Nicaragua back in the 80s, which I used, when I first came over to Latin America, I was kind of like, that was what I wanted to think. I thought I'd be covering that kind of thing. But like people said, then you kind of understood the front lines a bit more, and there was a bit more respect who you're dealing with. One of the weird things about Mexico is it's very creepy, very scary, because like, who are these cartels? Will they come into your hotel? That was one of the scariest things, was when they called me up in my hotel and that voice on the end of the line, they're asking for me by name. And it's like, okay.
Why were they doing that?
On that particular occasion, it was they followed me from on that particular occasion, I went to a casino and I gave him my name, my ID, and I think they followed me from the casino to the hotel. Right at the time, the US Treasury was blacklisting loads of casinos owned by Jalisco New Generation Cartel. So they thought they followed me and then called me up to find out, like to check out who I was, and give me a scare. I think that was what happened on that occasion. Yeah. I mean, I'm quite easy to look up. I mean, I've got a funny name, and they can like one time when I was with a big group, this big group in Michoacan, and they all had grenades tied around to them and like bullets, bullets across their chest, like, in a real kind of Pancho Villa style stuff. And I was getting on okay with these guys. They were like supposedly Autodefensa, but they were, revealed they were very, very clearly cartel type guys. Well, cartel guys. They were part of Los Piagras, isn't it? And they, I was getting okay with these guys, and they were posing for shots and stuff, and we're gonna have kind of a big kind of funny back and forth going on. And then one of them came out and just said, like, "No, he's DA. Why are you letting him take your photograph?" And I showed them my website on my phone. They looked at my website and were like, "Oh, okay." He's, saying, I said, "Look, I'm British. I'm not even American." And they looked at the website, and then the guy was like, "If I see you, I'm going to put a bullet in your head. I'll throw a grenade at you." And when I left then, and I was actually at the time, and you could probably understand this and sympathise with this. Actually, when I left, and I was actually more annoyed with myself. For then, I missed being with this group, and they went off into this big shootout that day, and I was annoyed with myself. Like, why did I get chased off from work from following that group?
Well, that might have been a blessing in disguise. You might get shot,
It might have been, but I was more annoyed for missing getting that on video, getting that, being in with this group, and I was like, I really annoyed myself at the moment. And then later on, one of the guys emailed me, so I've got kind of an easy name to spot, but then still people will accuse me of, like, who is this guy? And then I get, like, online people suddenly coming out saying I'm like CIA or DA or whatever.
People say it about us as well, man. It's like, yeah, cool, fine, whatever.
It's kind of part of the course. But then I got one of the guys emailing me saying what happened to the photos, and I just ignored it. And then this same crew got into a big shootout with the federal police, and they got massacred by the federal police. So they had other issues that they were worried about. I think a lot of them got killed by there. But like a lot of it, I think the thing is, though, a lot of this stuff is always scarier from the distance than when you actually get on the ground. And when you get on the ground, first you've got that adrenaline, and then you've got, like, you actually kind of see these things, and it's not as often as terrifying as when you go to these places. Now, one thing is that I've covered Latin America and this region for the last 23 years. And actually the most difficult things to cover that were really difficult on the ground, one was Venezuela in 2016, because that was like, it's hard to get, basic stuff. It's hard to get kind of food. You've got crazy, crazy stuff happening around you. And one was covering the earthquake in Haiti, which was just like in 2010, which was like post-apocalyptic. But covering the cartel stuff, it's often like you're in towns, the lights are still on. You can go and buy a nice meal. You can stay in a decent hotel, but you're dealing with these cartel groups moving around.
Yeah, mad. You got some balls, man. If people want to see your work and, like, follow you and talk to you and see what you're doing, where can they do that?
Yeah, sure thing. Check out my Substack, which is www.crashoutmedia.com. You can subscribe to that for free, or you can get more stories with the old paid sub there. Also see my website, which is, it's a funny name, but Ioan with an I, IOANGRILLO.com. You can see all my stuff there. I've got 3 books out you can find easily, and I've also got a bit of stuff under Ioan Grillo TV on YouTube, doing more video explainers and stuff there.
Excellent. Where's that name from, by the way, Ioan?
Yeah, Ioan's a Welsh name, and my last name's Italian, so it throws everybody off.
Yeah, I did. My mum's Welsh, so I was wondering, but I thought, nah, surely not. But yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I grew up in the southeast of England, but I got given like weird Welsh name by my dad, and also got an Italian name from my dad as well. So so yeah.
Cool. All right, mate. Thank you so much. That was excellent.
Yeah, appreciate it.
That was the Popular Front podcast. If you want more exclusive bonus episodes, extra video content, access to the Popular Front network, ad-free episodes, and other Patreon-only shows that we do, subscribe to patreon.com/popularfront. We are entirely grassroots and independent. Nobody owns us. Patreon keeps us going, as does our merchandise. You can get Popular Front apparel and accessories at www.popularfront.shop. You can also buy our various publications there, like the Popular Front magazine, which comes out 4 times a year. We are censored on social media and streaming platforms, so please follow and share our content. Watch our documentaries at youtube.com/popularfront. Follow us on Instagram at popular.front, Twitter at popularfront_, and for uncensored updates on the world at war, follow our Telegram at popularxfront. If you want to keep track of my other projects, it's the same on all socials at Jake_Hanrahan. That's HANRAHAN. For all these links and more, go to www.popularfront.cc. The music in this episode was produced by Sam Black. Check him out at samblackpf.com or search Sam Black PF on Spotify. The intro music is by Home. If you want to advertise with us and you're not literally evil, email jake@hanrahan.tv. Thank you to the Patreons on the credit tier. They are Onofrio Modogno, Pengu, Jessica, Peter Cherry, Lupe Calderon-Garnica, Thomas Giuseppe, Viola Forvel, Christian Bustamante, Daniel Verdin, Margosha, Rohan, Ryan Barbadillo, VS, Brian R, Evan Pank, Bradley Hope, Wizard Actual, Benjamin Topper, Siddhartha O, Damien, Cameron Collins, Scott Turnbull, Matthew Diffley, Claire, Liana, Robert, Sean, Cusinat 8, Chris Janovich, NTHG, Ethan Zwick, Peter Gabriel K, David McManus, Tom Petrie, James Leons, Bradley Davies, No Dogs No Hamsters, Brendan Crave, B, Dallas Dunn, LD50 Seattle, Adam H, B, Rambo, Larson 8669, Ivan Julien, Diamondstein, Michael O'Connor, Nicholas Butter, JD, James Karpinski, Jav, James Colley, Ethan Fitzmadrid, Ed Coulthard, D. San, Mike Barone, Scott Hopton, Liam Williams, Propaganda, DZA, Giorgio Arani, Vegan Straight Edge, Amy, Rubicon, Frank Austin, Caitlin Wicks, Michael Neck, Freya Northman, Andrew Hurley, Vida Provost, Brian McLaughlin, Tom Lochrin, Young Wasabi, Tony Bin, Adam Bergsnyder, JL, Stephen Davila, Chad Walker, Peter McCormick from What Bitcoin Did, Christopher Martin, Ryan Sandercock, and Moritz Zumbel. Thank you all so much. Support us at patreon.com/popularfront.